So we've gone over some basics for modeling using curves and creating surfaces and some of these NURB primitives here and the difference between NURBS modeling and polygon modeling. But I do want to spend the majority of this week's lessons on going over the different mesh tools that we have here in order to manipulate poly models. And so I want to start by kind of going over this modeling toolkit and all of the different kind of components that are in here. So if you don't have a 3-button mouse, I'm sure you do at this point, but if you didn't, you're also able to select what component mode you're working in. So object mode. Let's go ahead and frame up this cube here. Object mode, vertice mode, edge mode, and face mode. And this last one it we'll get into later is a UV mode. Okay. And so, and then also you can choose which method of selection. This drag method here can be kind of useful if you are, well, I don't find that too useful. But if you have a multitude of faces that you want to select at one time, this might be a kind of useful tool. Highlights back faces means that you can click on a face if you, and it won't always do it, but you're able to kind of select the back faces of a model even if you're not facing it. And then we have other different kind of selection methods here. So something we'll get into later is symmetry. Well, actually, I'll get into it right now. If I turn symmetry on, and let's say I'm turning it on for object X, then if I go ahead and select one side of my cube, it's going to select the opposite side. So this can be incredibly useful if you are modeling something that's symmetrical. You can do it based off of the object's coordinates, or you could do it based off of the world coordinates. See this selection constraint where you can just select different types of parts of components here. Transform constraint. So this is something if I have, something we'll get into later is an edge loop. And here you're able to choose whether or not you want it to move based off of the surface that it's on, or if you want it to move based off of maintaining its geometry. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. And then again, we have a kind of soft selection toggle here that you can turn on or off. So a lot of the same, some of the same things that we'll find in the tool settings and using this. Like I said before, there's many different ways that you can achieve the same result in Maya, different ways of kind of accessing the same tools. So down here, we have some mesh tools that we've already gone over. One of them that we haven't, I think, is smooth. So let me go over what smooth does really quick. Let me go to my object mode, and if I hit smooth, what it's going to do is it's going to add a number of subdivisions to this cube and also do some math in order to give the appearance of roundness to this object. So let me go ahead and hit smooth, and what it's done is it has kind of averaged out. It's added subdivisions and then reformatted this this object to have a type of smoothness. Now we can actually, by hitting, let's see, which is it? By hitting 2 on your keyboard, you're able to kind of preview what that smooth looks like. And so this can be kind of handy as you're modeling if you then are going to add a level of subdivisions in order to add greater detail and smoothness to what you've modeled, because it's not very often that you're modeling. You might be modeling something that is built out of a lot of facets, but many times you're going to be modeling something that has a softer kind of appearance to it. And because we're polymodeling and not modeling with NURBS, smoothing something out will give the appearance of a kind of roundness, smoothness, or kind of curvature to your object. So let me go ahead now, actually, while we have this smooth on, this preview of smooth, again by pressing 2. 1 is the actual geometry, 2 is a kind of smooth mode, 3 is without the wireframe around it, and 4 is the wireframe of smooth, okay? Or 4 is just wireframe mode in general, so if I have smooth turned on or not. And this is just a preview. Again, I'm hitting 5 now on my keyboard to bring me back to shaded mode, okay? So 1, 2, and 3 are the way that we can kind of preview smooth, the smoothing function. And so let me go ahead and show you in my attribute editor. Because this is a polycube, I haven't edited the components or done any transform tools on the components. If I go in here now and increase the subdivisions, you can see how that's going to affect the way that we understand how smooth works. And because I'm adding greater detail, there are greater detail to these faces get maintained, and then the outer edge gets smoothed. And so now we have something that looks more like a kind of cushion. And if I add even more subdivisions here, you can see that it's just giving a real roundness to the corner edges. Let me go ahead and hit 3. Okay, so that's what smooth does. And again, I'm just hitting 1. This is, when I hit 1, this is what my model actually looks like. And if I hit 3, this is a preview of what smooth looks like. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But now if I go to my modeling toolkit and hit smooth, it's going to actually perform the function of smoothing my object. And so now if I hit 1, we can see what that smooth, what this model looks like now, okay? So that's what smooth does. Let's go down to these components and go to extrude. And so let me go ahead and actually delete this object and make another cube here. And so extrude allows you to kind of pull faces out of each other and create new geometry that way. What I mean by that is, and I have this drag, I don't want drag, I like pick as my kind of method of selection that I like better. So if I select this face, for example, and transform this up, I'm actually just moving this face, and it maintains a kind of connection and actually enlarges the faces around it. And so, but if I want to extrude this up, if I hit extrude, it's going to allow me to kind of pull more geometry out of itself. If I hit this scale in the center, I'm able to scale it down and then pull it up. Or scale it down, hit enter, or click off of it, hit it again, hit extrude again, and then pull up. So this is what the extrude function does. It kind of creates a duplicate face or vertice. I'm not sure about edges, perhaps edges, but I've never used it for that. And so it allows you to kind of create a duplicate face from the face that already exists. So here I'm pulling in this face, click it off of it, click back on, and then hit extrude, and now I can pull this up and extrude up. So this is what extrude does. There's a couple different ways that you can access extrude functions. So this is how it looks when you use it down here in the modeling toolkit. Another function is bevel. And actually, let me go ahead and see what extrude looks like if I extrude on a vertice. And I actually still have my symmetry turned on, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And I'm just going to select this vertice here, and I'm going to hit extrude. And so what it does actually here is when I use it on a vertice, it creates kind of 3 vertices around it, pulls it out a certain distance tangential to the direction of that vertice. And so this is what a kind of poly extrude vertex looks like. Let me go ahead and see what an edge looks like if I extrude an edge. And the edge allows me to kind of pull out a plane, a new face that extrudes out from the edge. So this actually brings to mind another thing that I want to kind of mention, which is that we want to be modeling whole objects. Something like this isn't, it's not really kosher to have a plane that has no depth to it, kind of just sitting out in the world space. If we are modeling objects, and in particular for this project too, we don't necessarily want to see anything like this because we are modeling something that we would maybe potentially be 3D printing. And because this face here, this plane, has no dimension, it's an infinitely thin plane, this we would not be able to 3D print and we would have an error in our model. So we don't want to necessarily do this. The rest of this model has volume to it, and so the rest of the model would be fine. So you don't necessarily want to use, I wouldn't use this kind of edge extrude, but it's possible you can do that. Let me go ahead and undo, and also undo this vertice. The next one I want to talk about here is Bevel. And Bevel allows you to cut an edge into two edges, and it will create a beveled look around your edge. So I'm going to double click actually all my, let's say that this is a kind of cake here. And this is something that you can kind of see is kind of an issue. And that is that this top edge doesn't recognize that this is an edge loop. You have to go around and select each edge. Whereas for these edges, it recognizes it as an edge loop. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, you know, like Maya sometimes doesn't work the way you would imagine it would. So this is not recognized as an edge loop, but these are, okay. And I think that's because there's like geometry above it that helps it to determine that that's an edge loop. At any rate, let's just say that I have this kind of boxy cake, tiered kind of boxy surface. And if I hit the bevel tool, what it'll do, it'll create a kind of bevel. And this bevel actually is a little bit too large. I'm going to reduce the fraction of this bevel down quite a bit. And what we have here is a kind of interactive options bar, which allows you to customize the options of these tools here. And so what you can see is that this bevel, now we've created a beveled edge. Let me undo it and redo it, right? So you can see. Well, maybe it's easier if I hover over any of these options here, I'm able to use a sliding kind of scale at tenths of a unit. Okay, so this is with no bevel, and this is what a bevel looks like. So that's what bevel does. And it's kind of a nice way that you can add a little bit of softness to your form just by adding some detail. And this is what we do when we model. We start with a kind of very simple, large shape that then we, over time, add more and increasingly more and more detail. I'm going to stop it here, and why don't you go ahead and try out some of these tools, and when we come back we'll get into more, we'll finish up the modeling toolkit.